City Matters.
Welcome to Influential Origins. My name is Alan Mindel, and today I have the honor to have a fantastic guest, Michelle Ahdoot. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate going through your history with you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
So, Michelle, talk to me about your dad growing up in Iran and how he ended up going to medical school in Germany. How did he get from Iran to Germany and when?
Sure. So he was born in 1935 in Iran. He was one of 7 siblings. He was the second in line. Great upbringing. Interesting back then. You know, obviously, Jews were still the minority in Iran, but accepted more, you know, during the reign of the Shah then. But his dad was in business. So, you know, the shuk, the market, et cetera, et cetera. And my dad and his older brother, who's 18 months older than him, Robert, grew up sort of taking care of the younger siblings. But as time went on, it just became that point of going into business with their dad or venturing out and taking that next step of higher education. And they decided to go to medical school in Germany, which is just to this day still so incredulous to me because of the timing. The timing was post-Holocaust Germany. Right. But there were other Iranian Jews there as well. It was a small cohort of them, and they took the plunge. They went there, and I have to say that he speaks very, you know, just looking back fondly at their time there, both learning and exploring the culture. And he says that people were actually very welcoming to them.
Now, during the Holocaust, Iran was Allied controlled.
Yes.
Basically, to make sure that there was routes through.
Correct.
And for the use of fuel and everything else.
Correct. Exactly.
And so the Shah lost control for a small period, but then came back.
Right.
By the time he got there and went to Germany, we're talking a post-war Germany that was being rebuilt.
Exactly.
By the U.S. government in its own vision.
Correct.
Of a new democracy.
Right. And I mean, interestingly enough, sometimes when we ask my dad, why Germany? Why? Right. How? He said, well, it just turned out that they had the spots there for medical school. He said, and actually it was better than anyone would think because it was post this disaster. If anything, the people there were more welcoming than they would have been previously. So,
which might, I mean, in a lot of ways that holds true to today.
A lot, totally, absolutely. You know? When you think about it, it's just sort of, it's logical, but at the same time, still sort of that.
Right, we have a hard time getting used to it.
Totally.
But when we look at the facts on the ground.
Exactly.
Today, Germany does more to stand up to anti-Semitism than just about any other
that's it.
nation state in Europe.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, I mean, because they were ground zero of it, that I think, you know, many of them, whether learned from it or, you know, the post-trauma, whatever it might be, that is the case. Exactly what you're saying.
So he goes to Germany at that time. Your mother, she also was Iranian, but she in the 1940s.
Yes, they left.
Moves.
Yeah, so that was different. My mother, yes, was born in 42, one of 4 siblings, 4 girls. And this is very interesting in that they did not flee Iran because of persecution.
Right.
But my mom's mom was one of, I believe, 7 siblings as well, 7 or 8. Right. Very cultured, very worldly. And it was my mom's oldest uncle who just thought that America was sort of the new frontier, you know, both for business, for culture, that it was just the move that should be made. So they moved. She was 7 years old. So I think it was in 49.
Right.
They moved to the U.S., to Queens, New York, one of the first Iranian Jewish families to do so.
Right.
And I think it was more just that her uncle was a visionary of sorts, and they were all just very cultured and worldly, and that was their move.
So how does your mom get now? She goes from Iran to Queens, and she meets your dad in Germany.
So actually, no.
Okay.
Let's backtrack. My dad's older brother met his wife in Iran, and she was with them in Germany. Okay. This gets good. When my mom was here, now we're going into the 60s.
Right.
My dad also came from Germany and Iran to the States.
Okay.
They actually were introduced here by my uncle's wife's family. And those are the Kalimians, who were also one of the first Iranian Jewish families to have been in the US. So they met here. They were married at Leonard's of New York, my parents, November 21st, 1965.
Leonard's of Great Neck.
With Leonard's of Great Neck.
Yeah.
With essentially every Iranian that at the time was here. And it's just wild because they have a video of the wedding. It's a black and white video that my dad had, sort of made and refurbished, and it's just incredible to see. So fully had the wedding here. To this day, my dad talks about what the cost per person was. I think it was like $13 or $19, and it's wild. So they got married here, started their life here, but always really kept true and maintained that strong, tight family Iranian tradition, which is amazing to me that all these years later, they still ensure that customs, hold strong.
When did your family get to Great Neck?
Great Neck was, I was born by the time we were already in Great Neck. So I believe it was 1971 or 2. They moved from Queens to Great Neck to University Gardens.
Right.
And then we moved from the south side to the north side in 80 or 81.
Which is a really, really critical time for the Iranian community.
Yes, exactly.
Because 1979.
That's it. That's when, so we were pre-revolution, obviously. I mean, I was born here, but it was the 80s when we started seeing the real influx of a lot, not just family members, obviously, but a lot of Iranian Jews that had to flee and were coming here by way of either mostly LA or New York. And we started seeing a change even in our schools. I started at JFK as a kindergartner. There were barely any Iranians except for myself and my cousins. But then slowly, the tide turned and shifted.
Because I think we grew up around the same time in Great Neck. And it was like a tectonic shift.
Big time.
At that point. Because Iran was, like you mentioned, a wealthy, educated, culturally strong,
absolutely,
diverse, nation run by the Shah, and Jews had been home there for thousands of years.
Absolutely, and coexisting, living. My parents tell me stories of even within their buildings that they lived in, one floor Muslim, one floor Jewish, getting along well.
Right.
Which is why it's heartbreaking what transpired, obviously. And which is why, the past few years with the women, life, freedom, this whole shift of what everyone's hoping and praying for regime change, and to be able to go back to Iran and see what was. And, side note, Alan, my husband was born in Iran, actually. So my husband was born in Iran in 72. They left right before the revolution, went to LA first, and then came to Roslyn here. And his dream is to go back. He remembers things, even though he was, I think, 5-6 years old when they left. But he remembers things so vividly that his dream is to go back and see and show us, which again, I don't get as much because to me, I'm very practical and I think, but it's not what it was. Why would you want to go back and see like where you lived? For sure, it's different, but people want to go back and see and feel the culture and feel the good that was. That
because
we're hoping
it lasted
will come back.
Thousands of years.
That's the whole thing.
Right.
That's it.
And it was, an overnight situation because if you look at pictures of Iran from the 1970s, women are wearing Western clothes,
absolutely,
have full rights, showing
culture,
their hair,
education. It was sort of the full Monty, and then just.
And today you mentioned, there's this movement of women, which I don't know if everyone is as familiar with what's going on with Iranian women today.
Yes.
In Iran.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what's going on is, if we want to call it, I don't know if resistance is the right word, or standing up, empowerment, or just, trying to get word out and stand up to this horrific regime, tyranny, essentially, Right now women are forced to have their heads covered at all times. If from what we hear, little pieces of hair are sticking out, they might get beaten, this and that. But now you have this wave of empowered women that are willing to risk it all to fight this and to fight for justice and to fight against oppression. And, that mixed with foreign governments and, who knows what else might happen, we can only hope that change will come.
That one day these people that used to live in a society where women were equal in every way,
exactly,
education in every other manner, today can't show their hair, can't show their nails.
No, that's it. It's heartbreaking.
Are subjugated.
Exactly.
And can't live like that anymore.
That's it.
Because they remember.
Exactly. So it's heartbreaking.
So I grew up in Great Neck. You grew up in Great Neck. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that a lot of us share, one is that, and I'm sure it affected you more, all of a sudden there was this huge influx of Iranian Jews that came to Great Neck and weren't coming like you established as of choice,
right?
But were forced, Any of your family that you that got rescued and you got to
Some,
get to know?
not my immediate first cousins, no. Some of my more distant cousins, yes. Stories of having to flee and hide and go through borders and be hidden. I mean, just these, terrible stories. And coming here truly with nothing.
Absolutely
after
nothing.
having everything there.
Right.
And that's where I always marvel at the perseverance and at the, oh my gosh, to be stripped of everything you knew and you had and still be able to come here and make something and not wallow in that, wallow in the horrificness of it all, but persevere is something that I will forever, forever look at with just, unbelievable amazement.
And it's a very prideful community.
Yes.
Very, proud to be Jews and proud of the state of Israel that didn't exist before 1948.
Yep.
All of those things were new to it and were seminal in your development as well.
Absolutely. No, 100%, of course.
But you were an American with your own American dreams, and you ended up going to school here at NYU.
Yes.
So what made you do that?
Okay, so great question. So I was an American. There's always this question, are you Iranian first or American first, right? So I think growing up, I was an American Iranian because that's just what I knew more.
Right.
I think as time went on, I became an Iranian American in that I started embracing my own culture more because at first, you want to fit in, you want to just be like everybody else. All my friends were American, there weren't Iranians here except for our cousins.
Right.
But over time, we started embracing that Iranian culture even more outwardly. We always did at home, but outwardly as such. And with that culture comes also differences. And one difference is, we could call it a double standard, but let's just say strict parenting in terms of societal. So what does that mean about, for instance, technically women typically get married earlier than Americans.
Right.
Women technically don't go away to college. This is now back then. We're talking now, I graduated high school in 94. So for me, my parents remember, my mom had been here for years and years. My dad had been here for years and years, but still they were not at all as laissez-faire anything goes as my American friends' parents, which brought me to college. And they did not want me going away to college. They didn't even want me dorming at college. But I was the youngest of four. I was hot-headed compared to, let's say other Iranian girls. So I fought my way to at least dorm, which brought me to NYU Stern. I knew I wanted to go into business. So Stern was a better choice than Columbia. Well, you see, I knew that then.
Turned out to be.
So that's where I started my journey. And I lived down there, and it was amazing. So you could say that I didn't have much of a choice in terms of I couldn't really leave New York, but it was a great choice. And
it was a great choice, and you end up going for finance and marketing.
Yes.
Which I don't know if you had a predictive reason when that would come in handy later in life.
Go figure. No.
Right, just go figure.
It was just interesting to me. I was always a math brain, interesting to me, and
right.
And
you never
I
thought it
just
would
went for
line up in the way it's lined up today.
No.
Right. So you go on. You eventually. Where'd you meet your husband?
Actually, funny enough, he went to NYU but graduated a year before I got there.
Okay.
So my cousin, Sheila, set us up after he had come back from Israel. He had gone to Technion for medical school.
Okay.
And she just said, I have a great guy for you, heart of gold.
Doctor, like your
And
dad's a doctor.
yeah, he was going to start his internship. He was back in New York about to start internship.
Right.
And the rest is history. He's just a beautiful, amazing human being.
That just happened to line up that way.
And look, I always say
same
timing,
career.
you know what? It's so interesting. We just had this talk last week with a bunch of friends, how important timing is.
Yeah.
You know, timing is everything. Timing, we say if we had met maybe even 6 months before, maybe I wouldn't have been ready. He wouldn't have been ready. It's just, you know, when things
Right.
are aligned, they're aligned. Even when you have two
Right.
human beings that could be perfect for each other, if the timing's not there, it might not work. But thank goodness, timing was perfect and luck has a lot to do with it. And here we are.
And you were one of the first students, if I got this right, that went on the precursor or the early versions of Birthright.
Oh yeah, no, it was actually Birthright. So
It was
it was
Birthright.
Birthright. I was a student at NYU, and Michael Steinhardt was involved, and I think that it was Steinhardt Center for Jewish Life, or there was something Steinhardt related, and the concept of Birthright came up. And I was part of the pilot program. And my brother, Mike, who's a year older than me, was a student at Binghamton, but he was still able to participate in it. I don't know if my parents would have allowed me to go without my brother.
Because
But anyway,
That made
so
it okay.
yeah. But so Mike came as well. And I think we were a cohort maybe of 30, 40 kids.
right.
And it was the first Birthright. I think it must have been maybe 1998.
So how did that really influence you?
You know, well, I'm going to tell you, I had been to Israel before then with my family.
Right.
And we grew up with that, the Iranian tradition, but the Jewish tradition tight.
Right.
And so we had that pride already. But of course, I'm going to say you anytime, and it's funny because my daughter who went on Birthright, who is Zionist to the core, me times 10, she even said, even though she had been to Israel a bunch of times, Birthright hits differently. It's a different
Right.
experience. You just see it through a different lens. So the same held true with me. We became very close with a couple of soldiers that were on our trip that I remember to this day. And it's just, it's incredible. It's incredible. And then seeing my daughter partake in it a couple of years ago, and she's actually leading the Duke Birthright trip next month is just amazing. So Birthright, we owe a lot to them. It's amazing.
And from there, you've also been involved in Friends of the IDF.
Yes. Yeah. So Friends of the IDF is something that, anyone that knows their work and what they do, the IDF is the IDF.
Right.
And I think the tagline is their job is to support us and our job is to support them.
Right.
I took poetic license. It might not be exactly that. But point being, I think now it's 9-10 years back. The Long Island chapter that the Ben Joseph family started
Yep.
came to existence. They had a couple of events back then, started off small and started getting bigger and bigger.
Right.
And I got involved. They are just an unbelievable family in every way. And what they wanted to make of this Long Island chapter, they made. And I jumped in both to MC the event every year.
Right.
But then with that MCing, just the passion grew even more. And we also got involved in helping to form the Women's Brigade with the FIDF New York chapter. And just taking things to the next level. And what they do is incredible. So my heart is just all in.
What people, a lot of people in our circle may know, but what people listening might not. Explain to people why the IDF prides itself on being exactly what the propaganda says it isn't.
Yes. So the IDF, simply put, is the most humanitarian army on earth.
Right.
In every way. And that's why it's the Israeli Defense Forces. You know, you have the other side and, you know, these horrific people that try to flip the narrative calling it the offensive forces. But that just shows how they're trying to grab at straws and flip the narrative and change things around. So it's Israel Defense Forces. They are humanitarian so much so, many people listening might not know, that when there's a need for whether it's an airstrike or some sort of attack on terrorists that might be harboring themselves in buildings with civilians, because that's what these, let's not say animals, but that's what these human beings do, Israel gives notification. They'll either drop flyers letting civilians know to evacuate. What other army does such a thing? It blows my mind.
Or call and text people in the building and say,
it's unbelievable.
Get out of the building.
It's truly, so it's just all of these things that no other army does. They are humanitarian to the core. It's incredible to me what Israel has built in terms of you know, the compulsory service, so that everybody knows they're going to be pridefully taking part in serving their country and ensuring the security of their country. It's a beautiful thing.
So explain how you got from this activity. I guess you were raising your own kids in Great Neck.
Yes.
And somewhere you got to United Parents Teachers, UPTC.
Yes. So I've always been a doer, and I thrive off being busy and making a difference in any way. So we have 4 kids, and with those 4 kids, I was a stay-at-home mom. So I was a stay-at-home mom, but I had to keep busy and do things constantly.
Right.
So when my first was, I think maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, at that point in elementary school, I became the PTA president. And then anyone that knows PTA life, once you're in, there's no getting out. So PTA president of elementary school, then became, you know, she then went to middle school. So became getting involved in middle school while now my other ones were in elementary school.
Right.
And UPTC, United Parent Teacher Council in the Great Neck Public School District, is actually an amazing thing. Essentially, it's a bridging of parents, teachers, administration to work together. And it's an umbrella of all the schools. I believe there's 10 or 11 public schools now within the Great Neck system. So it's a bridging of all of the PTA presidents. There's a president's council to discuss what's going on in each school, idea sharing, you know, brainstorming, figuring out how to make things better, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's all different committees to really then have that rapport with administration. There's a legislative committee, a transportation and safety committee. So it's really amazing because it's driven by parents, but in coordination with teachers and admin. That's the goal. So the goal is really bridge building, uniting to ensure that everybody's voice gets heard and change can be made, you know, in unity and partnership.
And it's also your bridge into the educational system.
Oh, absolutely.
Which just happened because you were a parent in this system in a community that you grew up in.
Right.
That you happened to be an Iranian in this community before there was all these other Iranians that had to come here for their own lives to be rescued through.
Absolutely.
And then you happened to be in NYU and be in that first group that goes to Birthright that happens to get you to really, not that you hadn't been to Israel before, but to understand the history and the experience of it, and you know why it's a moral nation and how it is this democracy in the middle of a crazy part of the world that doesn't have any of these rights, that you know has equal rights for women, equal rights for people of different sexual orientation, equal rights for people of different religious backgrounds, which is, you have a long history in a community that always did in the Middle East, where nowhere else now that exists today.
Absolutely.
You know, and you go from there to kind of understanding the educational system, and then your own kids eventually go on to school.
Yes.
Right. So where did they end up?
I have right now 2, both at Duke University. One's a senior and one's a sophomore.
Right. And 2 more to go.
And 2 more to go. One, as of now, is a senior who's planning on going to USC in the fall.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you've had all this exposure to, from elementary school education, junior high school and high school education. Now you've been a mom, a Jewish proud
Yes.
That's proud of our history and our Zionist freedom history. You've got these kids that go to American universities,
and even
much like
what,
you did.
and pre-university though, it's important to note that these kids also embrace their Zionism. So even more than typical, Hebrew school, that's one thing. But then the home tradition and Judaism is another thing. Seeing their grandparents embrace their Zionism is another thing. And then taking part in programming constantly. So two of them were part of Witness Project, UJA's Witness Project. So bonding with Holocaust survivors and seeing what hate can bring to ensure that it doesn't happen again, and learning what perseverance looks like. Or another one taking part in the Tikva Fund Scholars Program, Maimonides Scholars Program. So taking part in courses that really embrace and ensure that Zionistic identity is followed through with, and empowerment. So that was pre even them going to college, which also I think that's a huge part in both where I am now and where they are as individuals and
where
and
lots
Jews.
of kids, Jewish kids, are when they go to college, which sets us up for our next episode we're now going to do as to how the world kind of flipped and where you were and what happened from there. So thank you for this first episode.
Thank you.
As we get to the meat of the story.
Okay,
I think
sounds
next.
good.